Hi everyone, I'm Emily Ramshaw. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Thank you so much for joining us for the 7th annual Texas Tribune Festival. I am so honored to be able to be here to be part of hearing Chief Acevedo tell us the story of Hurricane Harvey, which for us has really been the story of a journalism lifetime. Anyone local here obviously already knows Chief Acevedo. He led the Austin Police Department for nearly a decade before we lost him to the city of Houston in 2016. He was the first Latino police chief in both Austin and Houston. He also serves as vice president of the Major Cities Chiefs Association and previously served as president of the National Latino Peace Officers Association. Maybe most important, he and his department last month helped rescue countless people who were in serious risk and serious danger amid the flooding of Hurricane Harvey. He even lost one of his own in the line of duty, a member of the Houston Police Department. So please join me in welcoming Chief Acevedo. So I want to remind you all there will be time for Q&A at the end, so start coming up with your tough questions now. Also, I'd love it if you'd silence your cell phones. The hashtag is TribFest17 if you are tweeting. All right, so Chief, I'm hoping, this session is called The Story of Harvey, and I really am hoping you can take us through this story, starting with sort of leading up to it. I mean, what was the point at which you realized, oh shit, we are really in for it?
Well, first of all, let me get something out of the way. The word dotard or dutard or whatever that word is, and the real dotard or dutard in the world is Harvey, that hurricane that when we started getting the reports of what was coming our way, we realized right off the bat, at least I did, and I think my organization, that what we were about to experience was something of historical proportion. And so as we started getting those weather reports, and it seemed they kept getting worse and worse leading up to the arrival of the storm, we actually made sure that you've got to set expectations for your department, you have to set expectations for your extended city family, and most importantly, you have to set expectations for the community, because people are so dismissive nowadays. They don't, it's the fake news, the government overreacts, the meteorologists never get it right, and what I knew is, in my heart of hearts, that we were in for a rough ride. And that was our mindset, and I can just tell you that, thank God, because as a result of that, I think the police department was very well prepared.
All that planning pays off. I mean, how much did you use your personal experience in Austin? Anybody in this room who's from Austin remembers the Halloween floods that we experienced here that were devastating, lost lives. Were you all properly prepared for that storm, and did it help you sort of set your standards for this one?
Well, see, there were some really valuable lessons learned in the Halloween floods. I'll never forget waking up to those floods, and it was sunny out already in downtown Austin. And the gauges, unbeknownst to us, all the gauges from the power of the water that was flowing towards us had all been knocked out. And so we were basically in the blind here in Austin. And so what I learned is that you don't want to rely on technology. I don't make the same mistake twice. And so what we did is, leading up to Harvey, I put my people on what we call tactical alert on Friday night at 6 p.m. Every member of the Houston Police Department that wore a badge had to be in uniform. All days off were canceled. And the reason we did it on Friday at 6 instead of Saturday night or Sundays, we wanted to establish an operational rhythm for the organization so we can identify any shortcomings, any issues, logistics, are there stations. And because of Halloween here, I actually ordered eyes on all of our bayous, because we learned that when you don't put eyes on these threats, you end up being blindsided. And as a result, we were able to, in Greens Point, that first night, Saturday night, we actually were able to start warning people, because we saw it with our own eyes and knocking on doors, and of course, nobody wanted to leave the apartments. Mm-hmm. 2 hours later, I found myself with the members of the Houston Police Department at the beginning up to our knees, and by the time we were done, over our waist, rescuing the same people that refused to evacuate earlier.
And there had been a lot of reporting, not just by the Texas Tribune, but lots of news organizations in the lead up to Harvey, in the months and year before Harvey, saying basically, Houston is at imminent risk, either of a direct hit on the Houston Ship Channel or, maybe more dangerously, of severe flooding. Did the community appropriately understand those risks? Did Sylvester Turner appropriately understand those risks?
Well, I think that initially a lot of us were being, our decision making and our processing, including the community and maybe even government officials, based on the past. The problem was from the perspective of the police department, and I think as we got closer into this event, we weren't about to deal with something that has never been dealt with. So you can't inform yourself based on what you're used to. We really believe that no matter what the flooding experience had been in Houston, we had never seen up to 50 inches of rain, and no region can take 50 inches of rain. And when you think about Houston, it certainly was a perfect storm in all sense of that word, or that phrase, because it is a city already prone to flooding. Since the last major hurricane, there's been a lot more concrete that's been laid down. And thankfully for me, as the new police chief that's only been there in 9 months at the time, my mayor, Sylvester Turner, told me, hey, Chief, do what you need to do. And gave me the green light to get the job done. And as we go on this conversation, we'll talk about a lot of the things that we just threw out the door.
Yes,
I'm not a process-oriented person. I'm a results-oriented person. And we threw away the process in a lot of instances and focused on saving lives.
Well, I want to talk about some of those decisions that you made in conjunction with Sylvester Turner and Ed Emmett, the county judge. Let's talk about evacuation, because the big question mark during and after Harvey was, should Houston have evacuated? How does this compare to Katrina or to Rita? You know, everybody thought that they were an expert on evacuation during this process. So I want to ask you, looking back on this process, first of all, how did you make the decision? How did you and Sylvester Turner make the decision not to evacuate, or not even to evacuate specific neighborhoods that were prone to flooding? And was it the right call?
Well, first and foremost, you know, it's really interesting that people like to second guess, and I found myself getting angry. It's like, we're in the middle of trying to save lives and people are already trying to debate this. I could care less. We'll let history make that decision. How do you evacuate 6.5 million people in this region, and where to? Where were you going to take them? If you see where the storm went, it hit not just Houston, it hit east of Houston, north of Houston. I'll never forget Steve McCraw. I called Colonel McCraw from DPS. Hey, Steve, we need a task force down here. He says, I've got 500 troopers that can't get through in Bastrop. Why? Because there was flash flooding, not just in Houston, but around the state. So we made a decision that we're better off having people shelter in place and doing limited evacuations based on neighborhoods that are historically prone to flooding, and doing it that way, because the whole city didn't, even though a big swath of the city was underwater, there are plenty of places where it would have moved people. So we decided to do limited evacuations based on certain neighborhoods instead of a citywide evacuation. I think that's just preposterous. Don't forget that I think we had, was it Rita? A previous hurricane where they decided to evacuate Houston, and a lot of people, many people, lost their lives during that evacuation.
120 people died total, and a lot of those people were people actually on the highway.
Yes.
I mean, this is morbid, but are you making a calculus in your head at this point that, you know, fewer people are going to lose their lives if they're crawling up onto their roofs and flooding than are going to lose their lives if they're caught in terrible traffic?
We know that when it comes to floods, most people, the majority of the deaths experienced in history will show you that most people get killed when they're out on the roads, when they're out on the highways through flash flooding. You know, God bless Sergeant Steve Perez, who I really think is a hero that spent 2.5 hours trying to get to work in the middle of the night. You know, it's kind of, flooded roadways can be like black ice where you can't see it, especially if it's an underpass in dark conditions. And it's much more dangerous for people to be on the road than it is to shelter in place in most instances and evacuate the areas that need to be evacuated.
What was your reaction? How did you feel when you saw the governor go on TV and say, if it were me, I'd be getting the hell out of Houston right now as fast as I could?
I didn't see that because I was too busy actually working.
How did you react when you heard it?
Yeah, you know, listen, the governor has, what I love about this event, I think the silver lining, we lost about 9 lives in the Houston area, in the city of Houston, which if you think about what we faced, that is just a miracle that so few lives, once one too many, that we lost such few numbers of lives. But I think that the best part for me as a human being was watching members of the legislature or the statewide, state elected officials, that we had an entire session where basically we're just beating up on cities. Everybody put that aside and people got to work. And I think that we need to take the playbook that the elected officials to the left and the right ran during this event And we need to do that 365 days a year in this country, and not just when we're facing these type of events.
Right. There did seem to be very little, politicking on this issue, on the left or the right, and nobody was sort of going after each other. But I do want to know, did you think that sent a conflicting message? That, the New York Times, I think there's an editorial calling it contradictory and confusing.
You know what? Look, I don't care about that's political theater and drama to me. I didn't care. My job and the job of the men and women of the Houston Police Department was there were real lives on the balance, and we'll let history decide, make that final decision. But I think that sometimes, elected officials, whether it's the governor, the mayor, or whomever, it's like a cop. We all make mistakes. I think if the governor had to, I don't want to speak for him, but if he had to take that back and had to do a redo, he would have chosen his words a little bit better. And subsequent to that, he said, well, maybe I would not have evacuated, because people are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and I think everyone in this room that's in the public, we've all had a redo that we'd like to have, and then I would think that the governor, that would probably be one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, when the rain started to pour down and down and down relentlessly, and the water started to rise, talk to me about orchestrating a search and rescue operation for a city the size of Houston. I mean, where do you even begin? How do you find people?
Let me tell you, that Saturday, when that storm hit, I got in this old beat-up Hummer that we have, the militarization of law enforcement, right? I don't see anybody screaming now about the MRAPs that were actually saving lives.
It actually seemed to work out in this case.
It's not about equipment. Public policy should be based on a thoughtful discussion. Militarization was baloney. It's not about the equipment. It's about how it's used and the policy, procedures, and training. We used our MRAPs that everybody's so upset about. You know how many lives are rescued with the SWAT MRAP in the city of Houston? Untold lives. So what we did is on Saturday, I was out in the fields. I like to lead from the front.
We know.
And I'm kind of a new chief, so we've made a lot of changes in the city of Houston. So we didn't want to end up like Katrina, where in some precincts up to 75% of the cops weren't on duty. And so I wanted to make sure that we held on to our officers. So the work started before it hit. I wanted to make sure that the organization and our entire leadership cadre, that our men and women understood what they were about to face. And we wanted to create a mindset of what they're about to face. And we told them what is coming, and this was on Thursday, what is coming is something that we have not experienced in recorded history in the United States or maybe anywhere in the world. This response of this police department and our performance will be studied and talked about for generations to come. And I am asking all of my men and women now, what do you want to be told about you and your department? And what do you want your children and grandchildren and generations of your offspring to know about how you perform this moment of time? If you give me the right speaking points, I promise you we're going to tell your story, and it's going to be a story of excellence. And so you cannot, we knew what was coming, we knew it's going to overwhelm. So on Saturday when the rain started coming, we were already 12 on, 12 off, everybody in uniform. But by Saturday night, when I found myself this much in water, rescuing about 300 people in Greens Point, when the Green Bayou overspilled, and by the time we were done, it was over my waist. And we got back to headquarters as soon as we could. And everywhere I went in that little Hummer, we had to keep finding a way to get back to headquarters because the city became an island. Everywhere you looked, it was like the most surreal experience of my career. Flooded cars everywhere. By the way, I had been tweeting since Thursday, stay home. Don't be on the roads. We knew what was coming. And over 500,000 cars were lost or flooded. By the time I got back to headquarters, I had seen so much destruction in terms of flooding that we made the decision on Saturday night, late that night, that no one was going to go home. That was it. So when the next squad came in at 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. the next day, nobody ever went home. And then you kind of wonder, had we done that from the onset, would Steve Perez still be alive, right? And so when we kept everybody on duty 24/7 for 6 straight nights. And what a lot of people don't know in this community is that the men and women of the Houston Police Department, 500 of their own homes were flooded. They had their own families being evacuated and rescued, and not one of those men and women left their post. And I'll get emotional because I can't tell you the sense of pride I had with this organization that not only do they put themselves at risk at night, in floodwaters without equipment, without the lighting, they did everything. They did whatever it took to save lives. And I'll never forget a cop coming up to me with tears in his eyes in pain because we weren't getting to everybody quick enough for him. And so I think when the story's told in its entirety, there are going to be a lot of beautiful moments.
Talk to us a little bit about the role of volunteers in this particular case. I mean, there were all these conversations about the Cajun Navy. I've heard folks comparing it to the movie Dunkirk, which, if you haven't seen it...
We started calling it Dunkirk. Right. Dunkirk used H-Town style, right?
I mean, we saw people coming in with monster trucks. I mean, I never thought I would like a monster truck in this case.
But be careful, those monster trucks, a lot of them flooded. They're not really designed for this. They look cool, but... well, here's what happened with that. Now, first of all, the 911 system became overwhelmed, right? They backed up. So we started actually using this great crowdsource we call social media. We were dispatching people based on Twitter. The media would get phone calls. Sally Ramirez from KHOU would tweet to me, direct tweet, here's somebody that needs help. I would send it to the DOC, which is the Department of Operations Center, and we just started rescuing people. Now, here was the frustrating part. Sometimes some of the people that work they're not first responders, or again, they're more about process. And so I had all these buddies texting me saying, hey, we got boats coming your way. We got boats coming your way. What do we do with them? And to make a long story short, nobody was doing anything with them. They needed to know where to go. So at one point, I hope my mayor isn't watching. I don't know if I've told him the story yet.
It is being live streamed, but go right ahead.
Yeah. But trust me, like I said, the best part for me was I was working for a guy named Sylvester Turner. I just wanted to get the job done. I went back to DOC and I said, I said, everybody quiet down. We are officially going rogue. The Houston Police Department is going rogue. We are now going to take over this Cajun Navy that's coming. I ordered that we have 8 staging areas identified throughout the city. We put a lieutenant and a sergeant in each staging area, and we started sending out information to the folks coming in with boats. And next thing you know, our folks were out there again at night with flashlights in these boats, and these volunteers, to me, are really the true heroes. And I mean, it was just a beautiful thing to watch. And quite frankly, some folks were concerned about, well, they're not really trained, and not only are they not trained, they're not certified when we have to rescue them. I said, listen, there are thousands of people calling for help. If my family needs help, I don't care who it is, I want them to go. And by the way, those folks that from Louisiana that are out there with them alligators and kill them with their bare hands, I feel safer for them trying to save me than with any of us professionals. And so you guys do what you want to do, but the Houston Police Department is going to use these folks when we're putting them to work. And they were just, again, a modern day Dunkirk. That was a beautiful thing to watch.
You saw them coming with the airboats.
Oh, airboats.
Yeah,
they brought food, they brought Cajun spices, they brought it all.
I mean, are there moments from the search and rescue that you will never forget that are just sort of seared into your memory? I mean, I read this, I think it was a Newsweek interview where someone saw you stand up out of the water and shake your sleeves and cockroaches came like flying out of your sleeves.
That was the most disgusting thing I've ever experienced in my life. That Saturday night, again, I like to lead from the front, and we knew I had made up my mind when I was in that water that Saturday night, and actually at first I started periscoping because I wanted people to understand what we were facing so they would stay home or pay attention to what's going on. I knew I was going to hold everybody hostage as soon as I got back, and I was going to let anybody go home anymore. When we took off that uniform and those roaches started flying off, it was the most disgusting. I threw everything away. Thank God I had 3 pairs of boots because I need all of them. We had this is the moccasin, that poison snake coming right at me. And I'm a city dweller. And this female sergeant, she was like can I say badass here?
Yeah, of course.
She was a badass. She grabbed that. She says, moccasin! She grabs it by the tail, heaves it. So then we rescued everybody there. We get back in the big old high water vehicle, Army truck surplus that we have. And one roach came off of her. Poisonous snake? No deal. No problem. One roach. Oh my God, it's a roach! But it's an experience I'll never forget. It was very, very, whatever you think you know about Harvey, I guarantee you don't know anything. You can't imagine it unless you see it with your own eyes.
What was different? I mean, obviously we're not that far out from this, but the death toll with Katrina was close to 1,400. With Rita, 120 people roughly died. I think the death toll from Harvey right now is close to 85 is what I've seen. What's different? What was different about this effort? How do you compare this to something like Katrina? Is it social media that people could get in? Is it communication that people could call out to be rescued? Is it that so many people in Houston have cars and it's such a car-friendly city that everybody, silver lining maybe?
For me, I think a big part of it was the willingness of people to put their own self-interest aside, put their differences aside, and put themselves at risk for others. And a police department, I want you to think, everybody's thinking about just rescues, but for law enforcement, not only did we rescue thousands of people, we lost count at 3,500. Not only did we rescue thousands of people, you didn't see widespread looting. We're in heavy range chasing guys that were robbing people. We caught them, took them to jail. So we not only took on a rescue role, which is not really the police department's primary role, but we also maintained our law and order role, and I think the difference was, we study history. I really believe that history does repeat itself, and the only way you can change history is to know it, understand it, and do something different to come up with a different outcome. And one of the reasons, again, that we went operational before, a lot of departments wait till right when the storm's hitting to go operational. It's too late. You can't identify problems. We went operational early, and we made this decision to keep everybody 24/7. Now it's going to cost a lot of money to the taxpayers, right?
We'll get to that.
Hey, but I think, to me, what value do you put on a life, right? I think that was the biggest difference. Is we put everybody, all hands on deck, and so did all the other agencies. And I think it takes people to get it done.
What was your messaging to Houston's immigrant community in the midst of all of this? We were at the exact same time Harvey was hitting. There were conversations around, DACA at the federal level, conversations around Texas's sanctuary cities legislation. There was a lot of anxiety that folks who needed help weren't going to seek it because they were afraid of deportation. How did you try to sort of allay those concerns?
Well, first of all, SB 4 actually hit in the middle of the storm on September 1st. If you all remember, it took effect. And so in the middle of all of this, we had to actually send a policy circular out to the entire department and make sure they understood what the new law was, so we're not in violation of the law. But we did a lot of social media, English and Spanish, and here's the deal. The relationship can't start the day before a major event. I've been there for 9 months, and I've been very visible, thanks to my mayor, Sylvester Turner, allowing me the privilege of actually doing this, standing up for law-abiding immigrants. I know, they're illegal immigration. I get it. And I'm wondering right now where the labor is going to come from. That's another story for another panel. But we had been talking about that our focus in the Houston Police Department is public safety. We go after the crooks. We don't care if they're documented or undocumented. We're going to make t-shirts say, Houston PD, we go after crooks, not cooks. And you like it? Anybody going to buy one? We're going out with those. But the messaging was consistent. Then the other thing I did is I contacted Customs and talked to our partners at ICE and Customs, because they came in to help, and they started tweeting in English and Spanish that they were not there to engage in any type of enforcement, and I think that all really helped.
What was your personal social media obviously, anybody who knows you knows you're all over social media. That should not come as any surprise. How did you use it effectively throughout the storm? How were you all communicating with folks? What was your strategy?
Well, it's funny because the debate of the media, well, I'm not the media, right? But and I love the media, you know that. I can't love the media. First Amendment's there for...
A man who loves the camera.
Hey,
yeah.
The First Amendment's there for a reason. By the way, the media helped save lives throughout this event. They were phenomenal.
Not according to Donald Trump, but...
Did he say that, really?
He said he didn't see any journalists. There were no journalists on the ground. They were too afraid to be there, is what he said. Right.
Well, I used Periscope, and I think that millions of people end up seeing my Twitter thing where it gives you the analysis. It was millions of people, and the reason we did that is because I was getting situational awareness real time by being in the front lines, and I wanted the community to join me. Now, some people, the haters will say, I say, well, he's just a media whore. He's just trying to be a big ham. No, I'm using a tool to try to communicate with 6.5 million people in a region that are in dire straits, and we're going to use every tool available. Now, once, like that first night of that Periscope, and then going around on patrol and everything else, it was a very effective way of bringing real-time information to the people, and quite frankly, the one institution in this country that's still the most trusted, regardless of what people think in government, is your police department. Just like if you look at polls, the police chief in most cities is probably one of the most trusted, not because of the person, but because of the nature of the work we do. And so you've got to use that bully pulpit, I think, to help save lives, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've said a couple things similar to this today, and I've also seen you quoted saying that you thought God put Sylvester Turner in the mayor's chair for this particular event. But it can't all have been seamless, and I know he's your boss. But talk to me about moments where, you know, there were differences of opinion among senior leadership. Any times that, you know, you got pissed?
Oh God, you do know me.
Yeah. Tell us a couple.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because my job is very focused. It's all about safety and security. That's my lane, safety and security. So as long as you don't interfere, and I'm talking about other colleagues that may be a little bit more risk averse, right? I think we need to be risk appropriate. But when lives are on the balance, it's time to take it to the edge without falling off the edge. And when people don't want to use the boats from other agencies because they're not certified, that's one of those moments where I kind of had a little bit of a meltdown and had to push back really hard.
Can you be specific about that circumstance?
Well, that circumstance, I can just tell you, I took somebody that works with me into a room, and I'm not proud of it, but I went into a 10-minute enraged, lunatic, profanity laden, because Sylvester Turner is my boss, and one of my jobs is to make sure he doesn't fail. And what I saw in some of the conversations is we're about to fail. And that may happen on somebody's watch, but it ain't going to happen on my watch. That man brought me there, and I really, as a spiritual person, believe that we were meant to be there together. I mean, I told him, it hit me. Like on day 4 of this event, it hit me. I told the mayor, God knew what he was doing. If you would have won your first 2 elections, that was his 3rd election, you wouldn't be here today running the city. And I really meant that from the bottom of my heart. But because things weren't going the way it needed to be going, I got into a screaming match, one-way screaming match that I feel horrible about. But 10, 15 minutes later, and by the way, I gave the person a big hug afterwards, and I said, hey man, I feel better, give me a hug. I'm telling you, this is the truth. It was God is my witness. 15 minutes later, he told me, give me a list of what you need. And sometimes the problem in government and the problem in society is that people are more focused on keeping their job than doing their job. And what I've told people, I'm not there to keep a job. I'm there to do a job. And my conversation was, I will effing walk away from this job after it's over, but I'll be goddamned if I'm going to watch people die because people have their heads up some, you know what. And I said, either get it out into the sunlight or get out of the way. The choice is yours.
How do you respond to, in the sort of aftermath of Harvey, criticism that Houston and coastal leaders have made sort of poor development decisions, that they've allowed this city to sort of be paved over, that the wetlands have been destroyed, and therefore Houston is far more susceptible to this type of flooding than it ever has been before? Well,
I think Houston is susceptible to this flooding because the state has been a pound, and the federal government and the state has been a penny wise and a pound foolish. Okay, first of all, Houston's a huge economic engine to this state. We have a port that is, by tonnage, probably the busiest in this nation. It has an $8 million impact per minute when we have to shut down that port. And so you can tighten your belt now, and let's get the mitigation that's needed with real dams where they're supposed to be, and pay a certain amount now, or you can pay a lot more one event at a time. The choice is ours. I believe that if they're that concerned, we should have never let it happen in the first place. But I believe that you can't stop growth. And understanding you're not going to stop growth, you need to manage that growth by having the proper systems of dam and whatever else you need. The solution is there. It's just a matter of what. Do we want to spend, $20, $30 billion doing that, or spending, $1 million a missile blowing something up somewhere? I'd rather protect Houston and our economic and critical infrastructure right in our own state.
I mean, how much do you put blame on state leaders for not taking climate change seriously at all in Texas?
Well, look, it's not just, now you're getting political on me. I'm a police chief. What's this? Is this getting political now? Hey, look.
You're no stranger to this.
Listen, I believe in global warming, and if you don't believe it, you've got like Manny Moore and Jack type one after the other events. We got to do something. And if we're not going to do something about climate change, then you better do something about the impact that climate change is going to have. And we know that scientists, people a lot more intelligent and more educated than the 90% of our politicians, and much more educated than I am, scientists that actually studied the science say it's a problem. I don't know about you, when I think I'm sick, I don't go to the legislature to tell them, hey, can you diagnose me? Well, the environment is a patient. And if we are going to treat the environment and deal with the environment, I think I'm going to put my trust in scientists and not in politicians that are more interested in the next primary election. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, so I mean, how do we reconcile these two things? How do we reconcile, state leadership that largely has its head in the sand on climate science with, Houston city leadership that has, allowed increased development with Houston being the sort of energy capital of America and the center of the state's economic engine, as far as that's concerned? I mean, where do you start making those decisions? I
think people need to vote. People need to start voting. People need to start paying attention. And I'm an immigrant, right? So yeah, I'm an immigrant. That's a four-letter word. I'm an immigrant, and for me, voting is an absolute responsibility. But not voting straight ticket, I think that's a disaster. I think that our job, all of us, I would love to see a tax like in Australia. We don't like taxes. If you don't vote, you pay a tax in Australia. Everybody needs to vote. Because right now what's happened to our country is that, here's the fix. If I were, and Schwarzenegger's onto this, so Arnold, thank you Arnold if you're listening, we need to stop gerrymandering on both sides of the aisle. Both the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right, all they care is about their personal fiefdoms when they're in power. They create nothing but safe districts, whether it's a state senate, House of Representatives. If we made every single political district at every level of government competitive in this country, where it's 50-50, where they have to focus on good public policy and not on good primary election politics, guess what's going to happen? We're going to get stuff fixed in our country, and that's what we all need to demand.
I know we're only at the beginning of the recovery here, but what does Houston need to do? I mean, what are the first steps Houston needs to take, whether it's a coastal spine or expanding the bayous? I mean, from a financial standpoint, what are your recommendations when you're looking to your mayor and saying, this is what we need to do?
Well, the mayor doesn't ask me for that kind of stuff. He wants me to keep people saying, look, let me just say this. Here we are. I've been there less than a year. Our homicide rate in the fourth largest city is down by 24%. 57 fewer people have been murdered this year. So we'll take that. I've been saying this from day one, and the mayor understands it. We have this revenue cap. We are in an artificially cash-starved city. Think about that for a minute. And people don't get it. Americans aren't and conservative Americans, it's not about small government. It's not about no government. It's about appropriately sized government and efficient government. People understand the value of their tax dollar. I think that until we get rid of that cap, you cannot be the fastest growing big city in the country and then have this cap saying, no, you can't hire more cops. When a tree falls down in your neighborhood, blocking your roadway, when do you want the government to come and pick it up? Now. When you call 911, when do you want the police officer, the paramedic to be there? Now. When you put your trash out and like all this debris, we've got to look at that. I think we have to look at funding for the city. We have to look at the flood control that the mayor's looking at. Right now, the most urgent thing for Mayor Turner is really the debris, getting it all out of there. It'll be probably $200, not $250 million hit for the city. And then we have to start building the infrastructure to protect the actual city from not just Houston, but other vulnerable cities and communities.
So if you had to go through Harvey all over again, God forbid, but there is a distinct chance you will have to go through something like Harvey again, what would you do differently? What mistakes were made this time around that you would rectify in the future?
Well, I think one of the things that I would do differently for my area of responsibility is I would have put everybody on a 24-hour cycle immediately, start on that footing, because it's a lot easier to go down than it is to come up. So I would have probably started on a 24-hour cycle for everybody and prepared for that.
So you were saying that the officer who unfortunately lost his life was headed back to work when that happened? He was off of a 12-hour shift? He
was just coming back, and that's not the reason I would do it. I would do it because we were fortunate that we got most of our workforce back and everybody came back. So that's one of the biggest takeaways for me from this. The other piece that I think is really important, I talked to the Mayor Turner about it, I've talked to Governor Abbott, to Dan Patrick, to anybody that would listen. We have got to put operators, people that are first responders, in charge of these emergency operations center. You can't have bureaucrats, okay? You cannot have bureaucrats in charge, because I've experienced it in too many places. Where again, they're more, when lives are on the balance and lives are, we're gonna make a difference one or the other, we should not worry about process, we should worry about results. And I'll give you an example. You know, we evacuated like 300 or 400 people. It was pouring down rain. We couldn't take them anywhere else because again, they were in the middle of an island. So one of my young lieutenants, guess what he did? He broke into a church. And he gave refuge. Oh my goodness. I started getting all these messages about it. And I said, here's the deal. When this is over, that lieutenant's going to get a commendation for utilizing good judgment. Secondly, well, thank you. If that church wants to have a public debate about it and his decision, I'd be happy to debate that. And I'll be using scripture to kick them in the rear, because that's supposed to be a refuge. And if that doesn't qualify as a reason to go in that church, I don't know what. And that went away real quick.
Well, because I have you on stage and because the Texas Tribune is a politics and policy news organization, I'm going to ask you a question. Your political star has sort of continued to rise as you land from high-profile event to high-profile event. You may have heard that the Democrats are trying to find someone to run for governor. They haven't had much luck yet.
No.
Do you have any interest in running for
You're making me blush all of a sudden. No. I've been accused of that for how many years now? I like being a police officer. I like being a first responder, and I'll be real honest with you. You know, I know that I do a good job because I equally piss off the left as much as I piss off the right. When you can piss off both ends of the spectrum, you know you're landing in the right spot, right? So I think I'm too moderate to ever be in politics. Politics is supposed to be about it's supposed to be pragmatic. It's supposed to be about solutions. It's not supposed to be about the next primary election, and that's not me.
Well, we're going to open it up to questions very soon, so get your questions ready. I want to ask just finally about the personal toll this took for you. I mean, obviously, you know, going through anything like this is incredibly painful and difficult. You evacuated your own family. I mean, talk about what this was like as a relatively new Houstonian, in addition to being the police chief.
Well, I mean, my poor son and his mom and Tanya, my wife, had just been there a few weeks, and next thing you know, hey, welcome to Houston. I won't be around for the next 3 or 4 weeks, but enjoy it and let me know if you need anything. We actually evacuated our 9-year-old to Austin. I want to give a shout out to Eanes Elementary that said, hey, we'll take him for a week. And he went back to his old school, and they actually gave him a week's free education. Thank you, Eanes Elementary. But the tough part for, you know, to be honest with you, it takes a toll. You can't sleep. None of us could sleep. Even after the immediate threat passed, it was pretty tough because we lived a nightmare in the city of Houston. We were living a nightmare for days. This storm would not go away, and I started joking after a while. I don't know about you guys, but I'm hearing Noah. You know, I mean, it did not go away, and my brain and most of the command cadre, we did not shut down probably till about the first night that I actually slept was the night that we buried Steve Perez. That night was, I got home and I fell asleep at 8:45, and my body finally just shut down. And I think that I knew that was the last thing I really had needed to get done. And I woke up at 5:15. That was the first night that I actually slept. So.
All right, well, we are going to open it up for questions. Please line up at the microphones and make sure that there are questions and not speeches if you can. And after the Q&A, just please stick around for a special announcement before you head out. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself if you can.
Wade Fickler, would you please tell us your perspective on the Joel Osteen controversy?
Oh, Lord, Joel Osteen's not controversial at all. Why would you bring that up? I've met him, a great guy. You know what? Somebody asked me that earlier, and all I know, I'll be real frank with you, I have no idea why he did or didn't. I just know this, that 59 was impacted with flooding, 10 was impacted with flooding. So you'd have to ask him. I don't know enough about it. I think that eventually he actually opened up his doors, right?
They did eventually.
So I have a feeling that what happens is that people don't think about all the issues. And I have a feeling that he probably made an assumption that people wouldn't be able to access the church. So maybe that's why he didn't open it. But I don't know enough about it. I'm still worried about making sure that we can help our community get back on their feet. So I haven't looked at that. Sorry.
Yeah, my name's Paul. I'm wondering, what are the biggest obstacles that you see from a law enforcement perspective to getting Houston back up and running? And that can include things like issues with infrastructure and dealing with the trash and people that have gone and now need to come back. What do you see as the chief?
I'm really worried about the finances of the city, personally. I don't think any one city can take the hit that we've taken. And then you add the fact that we have artificially, again, made ourselves a cash-strapped city, and there's so much infrastructure that needs to be fixed. I mean, 75% of our police fleet is beyond the miles that's supposed to be driven. Should in any other department with any funding, they'd be retired. So I really worry about the fiscal challenges ahead of us, and I hope that the folks that need to make a decision, the mayor's talking about how we can address these issues. I hope the taxpayers understand that we need to reboot a lot of our services. We need to reboot our city, and let's face it, we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch. You got to pay for it, and I think the longer we put it off, the more it's going to cost us. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
What do you think about the mayor getting some flack for recommending a tax increase at a time when a lot of folks are not even back in their homes?
You know what? At the end of the day, you got to pay for it, and I understand that, but you can't. Nobody's going to come and rebuild the city of Houston for free. So unless somebody has a magic pill that we can just give somebody and say, you will build it for free, you will fix it for free, it's got to be paid. So maybe in the long term, they can look at either the property tax or one set sales tax for 3 years. To me, the legislature, we shouldn't put it all on poor Sylvester Turner. The legislature needs to step up. The mayor, the governor, lieutenant governor, legislative leaders need to say, let's do a 1 cent sales tax for the next 3 years. That's more of a user tax. People that really can't afford it aren't going to spend it anyway. I don't think anybody will go bankrupt or 1 cent. That will have a much greater impact than just a small property tax increase. That's what I would maybe call on the state leaders to do.
That sounds like a pretty political move right there. Recommendation, yes, sir.
Well, you asked. I hope I don't. By the way, if I get fired after this, I'm going to come to you looking for a job.
You can come to Evan Smith.
Yeah.
Hi, Jose Vasquez. Thank you for your time today and also during the hurricane. I'm curious as to how you're documenting your lessons learned and also your strategy during the hurricane and how you're sharing that with your counterparts across the country.
We're in the process of doing an after-action report with the good, the bad, the ugly, what we did great, what we could do, what we didn't do so well, and what we can do better. And then as the first Vice President of Major City Chiefs, I guarantee you we will be doing an after-action presentation to all the chiefs in the country. And so there are lessons to be learned. And one of those is, and I think the mayor was brilliant, we cannot wait 6 months for funding to start coming in. The city will be bankrupt. We've got to put the process, by the way, write us the check and then we can give you the documentation later. We're not going anywhere. We can't hide it, right? So we've got to look at that. And that's one of the things I've talked about to the Homeland Security Secretary and to anybody that would listen. The other thing that lesson learned from us is that I wanted at least 500 cops from other cities. And boy, the process that they want to follow for that, because nobody wants to assume, we couldn't assume the cost up front. We've got to change that process where it is a little bit less, and thank God for relationships again. Because I called Steve McCraw, the colonel, and then the governor called me and called Mayor Turner, And the mayor and the governor says, hey, great job, whatever you need, let us know. Yeah, Governor, I need you to take on the cost up front of about 500 cops. And they did it. So that really is something we need to look at.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
She was actually
Oh,
next.
yes, ma'am.
Hi, Bridget Shea, Austin, Texas.
You look familiar to me.
I was following you on Periscope, and I think those are still archived. They're really fascinating.
Yeah,
to
they're on
watch.
Twitter.
Yeah. This is an issue we're grappling with at Travis County in trying to be better prepared because we know our region's going to be hit with wildfires and floods at the very least. How did you identify where the homebound were, elderly, handicapped, otherwise people who could not evacuate themselves? And then how did you handle it? Because there's not enough first responders for all of them.
Well, our commands knew where some of their vulnerable populations were, and our commands knew where to go. And I'll give you the example. The first place that we went in Kingwood, where I've been going since 1975, where my family was from, was a senior citizen assisted living place. And that's one of the first places we went as a department, evacuating people, having to carry people. So you've got to identify the places ahead of time so you can prioritize which is your most vulnerable population. Our command teams and our command staff were asked to do that, just like from a not just a rescue perspective, but from a public safety and security perspective. We identified all the pawn shops in the city, we identified all the gun shops in the city, and we put cops at all of those vulnerable locations. And in Hurricane Ike, many years ago, hundreds and hundreds of guns were stolen. In this hurricane, hardly any were stolen because we were proactive identifying all the key infrastructure and prioritizing what we're going to have eyes on.
Thank you.
Thank you, great to see you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Jana McKelvey, and my area of interest is special education
And what, ma'am?
Special education. So my question is, have you been tasked by TEA or anybody to work with them? Because we have found out that these students they can't track where the students have gone, whether they're typical or have disabilities or whatever. So I'm concerned about those kids who are going half days, or they're going shorter weeks, or they don't have a school at all, and parents, are still living in the community. I'm curious if, I hate to see kids getting arrested because they're doing stuff. I'm just curious if y'all are working together in any way.
Yeah, I think HISD is doing a really good job of actually, they've done a really great job. There were about 12,000 to 15,000 kids that were displaced because of damage to the schools, and they've done a really good job of moving all those kids to alternative sites. And they've also done a really good job, or doing a good job, of working with all the shelters to actually get transportation to these kids to and from school. So my hats go out to HISD because it's a huge operation, and I know they're working very closely with the shelters as well.
How many people do you still have living in shelters in Houston?
You know what? I wish I would have gotten that number. I was looking at it this morning, and I think it's a couple thousand that are still in shelters.
Including kids, I'm assuming.
There are some kids, but not that many. They're most people, what they do is that they self-check out and they end up going with family. But my heart aches for not people just in Houston, but everywhere. Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. I mean, the world's just upside. Mother Nature. I tweeted the other day. I think I said Mother Nature's really pissed or something at us. The sad truth is, I was in Northeast Houston Friday, driving around by myself, talking to the community members. These are hard-working. These are working-class people that they're telling me, hey, Chief, I make, X amount of dollars as I work. So I can't get any grant funding. Everything for me is loans. And so let me take a loan upon a loan to fix a house that, this isn't, these aren't huge fancy homes. These are just salt of the earth people. And so there's a lot of help that a lot of people need. And I hope that anybody that's listening to this, if you can give the disaster relief, especially those organizations where the money's going right back to those that need it, please do, because there's a lot of need out there.
I think you were next in line, yes, sir.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Chief Acevedo, for coming and speaking to us. I was wondering, you were saying getting a check maybe from the legislature. What do you think about tapping the rainy day fund? Because it actually, literally, you guys got a lot of that.
Well, look at if 50 inches of rain isn't a rainy day, I don't know what is. So, and I think that the federal government at some point is going to want to know what are we doing for ourselves before they keep issuing checks to us. So, this was an event of historical perspective, right? I mean, it's never happened. So I think all bets are off, and we got to do everything we need. And again, I wouldn't mind to pay, I don't know about you, I don't mind paying an extra penny sales tax for 3 years or 4 years. Hey, if we need to build an expensive dam, why don't we do that for the next 10 years? Everybody pay an extra penny, and it goes towards, key needs that we need as a society.
Yes, sir.
Hello? Oh, okay. I'd like to thank you for coming out as well. And my name's Cheyenne. I'm a Rice University student. And my question was, what can I, like as a college student, do that would be most effective in terms of like volunteering efforts? So basically, like, what are the greatest areas of need right now in Houston that we could help out with?
Well, a lot of people that are trying to do their homes on their own because they can't afford to hire somebody. I had a guy that I know from here that just, I'm not sure he's even a documented immigrant or not. I really don't care. I just know he's a great human being. He calls me, hey, we're in Houston. 3 of us. I have a carpenter with me. I just want to help people. You can go to the neighborhoods that need you most. If you have people that are handy with tools that can do drywall, that can do all those, just go into these impacted neighborhoods that need us most and help out. The other thing is for young, intelligent Rice students. We need help with kids in this country. The biggest threat to our national security, economic vibrancy, and if you think about, whether it's, extremist views, whether it's from ISIS or right wing or left wing, there are a lot of kids that, they're born in the circumstances through no fault of their own, that don't have enrichment programs, don't have good pre-K programs. Start volunteering, helping kids outside of Harvey. Start helping kids, you guys. Start being mentors and role models for all these kids that don't have anybody to help them. And let's help get these kids that are born just as smart as everybody else, but don't develop because they don't have the opportunities. Let's start helping these kids. Thank you, and congratulations on Rice. I know you gotta be smart if you go to Rice.
Got time for one more.
Hello,
One
my
more.
name is Greg James. I'm a high school journalist. My question for you is, how will you work with the mayor to rebuild the city and put in place infrastructure that will prevent floods in the future?
Yeah, I think that, again, my job will be to tell the story of the needs of the city. I've been talking about, as one of the newer Houstonians, about the challenges of being an artificially cash-starved city since I got there. And, and I tell people, when you call us because you're getting shot at, we're going to be there real quick. But you call me for a loud party, we might not ever show up. You can't have a police department that 20 years ago, the city was 500,000 fewer people, but we had 300 more cops. So the city has grown by 500,000 people, but we have 300 fewer cops. That doesn't add up.
How short-staffed were you as of when Harvey hit? How many officers short?
We are authorized 5,200. We were down to about 5,100. But we have studies, and remember, studies are very conservative because the person that you hire wants to get another study, right? So they can't be too honest. Hey, let's face it, everybody's got an agenda. And we have studies that show we're a couple thousand cops short. I just tell my community, City of Chicago is not that much bigger than us. I don't think they're anywhere near as spread out as us. They're anywhere from 12 to 13,000 police officers. We're down to 5,100. People are smart. You know what they do? I did not know that. So part of our job to that young journalist is I want to help the mayor tell the story of what's going on in Houston, what the challenges are, so people can be well informed and make good decisions when they vote on the different initiatives that are going to be coming their way.
Right. Well, before we head out, a lot of people have asked this weekend how they can contribute to the Harvey relief effort, and there are many good causes and many great charities. We at the Trib took special note when one of those charities came online because it was in part due to the hard and selfless work of a really good friend of the Tribune, Roy Spence, the co-founder of GSD&M. Roy's going to come up and just talk briefly about the One America Foundation and the solicitation spot he created featuring every living former president of the United States. So Roy, come on up here just for a second. Yep.
First of all, we can sign a petition for him to be governor, can we? without his knowledge.
Oh, Lord.
So I'm pretty good at this shit. So, and by the way, Art should be the person when you think about the art of frontline leadership, not sideline leadership. Right here, frontline leadership.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, because Evan gave me 90 seconds. It's a joke. It's true, though. The people on the front line are not the first responders. They're the first responders, they're the second responders, they're the third responders, and sometimes, worst case, they're the final responders. And as we look at neighbor helping neighbor, and what we ought to do in Houston, although I'm from Austin, is to ask Houston to borrow $2 billion from the rainy day fund, and then just don't pay it back. That's what I would do. Anyway.
Hey, go back.
And do what Bob Dylan said, just repent. I'm so sorry. But my partner, Judy Tabulsi, of 46 years in business, we started GSD&M. We got a call on Saturday before Labor Day from a guy named Bill Clinton and a guy named George Bush. And they said, all the former presidents want to do something. And there were 3 catches to it. One, Roy, you and Judy have to do it because we did the Katrina work and the Rita work and the Haiti work. I'm like the eHarmony for politicians. But anyway, secondly, none of the presidents the day after Labor Day, which was 2 days later, are in the same place. You're going to have 5 film groups, 1 in Maine, 1 in Dallas, 1 in Plains, Georgia, 1 in D.C., and 1 in California. And the third catch was we want to be on the first NFL game 3 days from now. And so Judy and I said, no problem. We hung up and started crying. And so, and then called my daughter, Courtney Spence, who has a marketing firm in San Francisco, and cut and run, edit here. And here's what we do in the creative community when we're at our best. We answer the call too. It's easier. We don't put ourselves in harm's way, but we created Don't Mess with Texas. And by the way, 2 days after the deal, our agency did Harvey Can't Mess with Texas. And then we got on call on Labor Day with all the former presidents and their staffs, and they're fairly opinion-rich. Not one of them. They did exactly what the first responders did. They did exactly what the Cajun Navy did. They put aside their differences, and they said, against all odds, we're going to cut a 30-second PSA with 5 former presidents. So thank you, it's my best side. So we film them all, and by the way, all right, you'll appreciate this. Tuesday morning, we have crews all over America, and I'm watching at 5 a.m., and Irma's coming. So we had 2 spots cut. And they got the edit stuff back in. The cut and run is the edit bay here. And on Wednesday, we stayed up all night. We were not near in arm's way. We were just doing what we could do. And we got the spot on the air on the NFL that night. And here's what America needs to see. When America is at her best, against all odds, we come together and lift each other up. Art said it the best. We needed that 365. Because at our best, America was born different, not perfect. We were born different. And we said, we're going to raise the barn again together. We're going to take care of one another. People have to work, but at some point, when people need help, we need leaders to set aside their differences and lift this country up. Now, I'm going to play the TV spot. If you don't like it, it's Judy's fault. But if you do, these are 4 or 5 former presidents who came together to help the people that are affected not only by Harvey, but also by Irma.
Awesome.
Hurricane Harvey brought terrible destruction, but it also brought out the best in humanity.
As former presidents, we wanted to help our fellow Americans begin to recover.
Our friends in Texas, including Presidents Bush 41 and 43, are doing just that.
People are hurting down here, but as one Texan put it, we've got more love in Texas than water.
We love you, Texas.
Donate to oneamericaappeal.org. We are all in this together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of you for coming today, and please just give a huge round of applause for Art Acevedo. Thank you so much for coming out.